Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants' lines will be on a listen-only mode until the question and answer session. At that time, please press star followed by the number 1. Unmute your line and record your name clearly as prompted to be introduced. Today's call is being recorded, and if you have any objections, you may disconnect. I'd now like to introduce Arlene Dahl with U.S. Census. Ma'am, you may begin.
Thank you, Robin. And thank you to Anthony Ermitaggio from the Census Bureau for hosting our webinar. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our bonus September LED webinar. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau and the Local Employment Dynamics Partnership, in collaboration with the Council for Community and Economic Research and the Labor Market Information Institute, it is my pleasure to welcome yet another one of our esteemed speakers from the 2021 LED Virtual Workshop, Jeff Rosenthal, along with Chi Wong, as they present recent cross-county commuting patterns. This presentation will explore different analyses of cross-county commuting patterns in North Carolina. This research seeks to understand how commuting has changed across the state of North Carolina. The presentation will focus on whether workers work and live in the same county, how that relationship changed over time, and the confluence of labor markets and commuting patterns. Jeff Rosenthal is a senior labor market analyst with the Labor and Economic Analysis Division of the North Carolina Department of Commerce. His research interests include work and workforce development, and his projects include employment projections, developing lists for STAR jobs, studying employer needs, and labor market information training. Previously, he worked in government and academic settings, including the U.S. Census Bureau and Wake Forest University. He has a MA and PhD in sociology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and a BA from Northwestern University. Chi Wong is an economist also with the Labor and Economic Analysis Division of the North Carolina Department of Commerce. His interests include employment and workforce data analysis, and his projects include employment projections and creating Tableau dashboards. Previously, he worked at RTI International. He has a master's in economics from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and a bachelor's from Xavier University. With that, I welcome both Jeff and Chi.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jolene, and thank you, Anthony. I'm honored to be here representing my agency, the North Carolina Department of Commerce, and my work group, the Labor and Economic Analysis Division, otherwise known as LEAD. Today's presentation, as Erlene mentioned, will basically focus in on some of the recent research that we've done regarding cross-county commuting patterns. We're basically trying to figure out how commuting works and how labor markets form, and trying to look at how workers live, commute, and work in the state of North Carolina. But before I begin, to this end, we use a lot of Census Bureau data, including the longitudinal employer household dynamics origin destination employment statistics, otherwise known as LODES. So before I lead LEAD's presentation using LODES data on behalf of the LED partnership and for C2ER and LMI Institute, I'd like to say a word or two about LEAD. LEAD, we're a work group of about 40 people, all doing the best that we can for a wide variety of different constituencies out there, from the governor's office to the legislature, from the workforce development community to the economic development community, to students just looking for some career information. Everything that we do is to help people make data-driven economic decisions. About half of us work on behalf of the Bureau of Labor Statistics programs, working on the official state and sub-state statistics for things like labor force statistics, as seen in LAUS, the local area unemployment statistics, and industry statistics from the QCW, or the Quarterly Census of Employment Wages, and the CES, the Current Employment Statistics. And finally, also, this group provides information for occupational statistics, as found in the OEWS, the Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics Program. We also have a group that does big data analytics. Among other data sets they use the Common Follow-Up System, which tracks workers in North Carolina. Our public-facing version of that, the NC Tower, will track North Carolina Community College System and University of North Carolina System graduates and some of their employment and education outcomes post-graduation. The group that Chi and I are a part of, the Economic Policy and Analysis, does a wide variety of different things. Just a sample, Chi and I both work on employment projections, but we also have people who do things like county tier designations, dashboards, company briefs, policy reports, and white papers, and our great career information portal, the nccareers.org. We'd be nowhere without our information delivery people who help provide information for us and share with the world. We have a blog article called the Lead Feed, which we post to every so often. In fact, some of the research that I'm covering this afternoon comes directly from the efforts that are shared on the Lead Feed. And finally, a little birdie told me that we are in the 21st century with Twitter accounts. We've got two handles. At Careers in NC is more focused on career information, and at Lead in NC is our general handle. So as I mentioned today, what we're going to do is our goal is to talk about some of the research that we've done. We've done bits and pieces of research over the last 6 or 7 years to this end, and all of it's basically trying to look into labor markets and try to better understand commuting patterns in labor markets across the state of North Carolina. Now, as Erlene mentioned, I gave basically this presentation for the LED conference in April. But today's value add for this is not only am I going to speak a little bit more slowly, but I'm also delighted to share my time with my esteemed colleague, Chi Wong, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the great research that he's done regarding interconnected markets. So, one transition for Chi.
Hi, everybody. How are you doing? So thank you, Jeff, for the very warm introduction. My name's Chi Wong. I'm an economist at Lead, and I'll be kicking off this big old presentation today with a descriptive overview of the interconnected labor markets in North Carolina. So first, we might want to start with, well, what is an interconnected labor market? It's a cluster of counties which have been determined to have a sufficient level of inter-county commuting via loads data. There will be more details about the exact methodology in the next slide, but again, the data comes from loads, and the determination of those clusters is listed from the USDA's commuting zones calculations. And maybe a second question that you might ask is, well, why even study or use these interconnected markets? Well, for one, it serves as some very baseline evidence for policymakers hoping to create sub-state areas. Another related reason is that understanding these interconnected markets can support regional economic development strategies and helps counties understand how to, collaboratively allocate resources. After all, you should recognize that just living in one county doesn't guarantee you'll work there, and it might do good for everybody to work together. And finally, just for the sake of knowledge, finding these clusters helps us understand North Carolina's economic geography in general. So I mentioned that we'd go into the methodology a little bit, and as I said, it's based on the USDA's commuting zones calculations. They published these commuting zones in 2000 and 2010. I don't know if they've updated them since, but here's the formula that they used. PIJ is equal to the commuters from County I to County J, and from commuters from County J to I divided by the resident labor force of the smaller county. And so this is called this P stands for proportion, and what this proportion again, I think the formula is pretty straightforward, and what it says is what you get. But what the proportion allows you to do is it allows you to measure those inter-county flows. And from this proportion, these counties are joined by the highest percentage of cross-commuting, and then those initial clusters are joined with other counties and other counties and clusters based on the average differences from other counties, even more counties and clusters. And then this process is repeated over and over until there's a designated stopping point. And in this slide, we'll show you kind of the algorithm in action. I need to play it, right? Is there a way to? Oh yeah. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to press play on this, and this video is from like 8 years ago from the initial study done with this with the data by two of our colleagues who are no longer here. And I initially mentioned a designated stopping point, and how's that determined? Well, we set the stopping point based on statistical tests, common sense, and external validity via comparison to USDA commuting zones. And when I say common sense, I mean if the center of the cluster to any point in the cluster is too great or doesn't seem natural, then you have to change the stopping point to create more natural clusters. So with all that said, what do interconnected labor markets in North Carolina look like today? Well, or rather with the most recent data. So in this slide, we're looking at the share of workers who live and work within the designated hubs, also known as the hub share. So first, as expected, 3 of the major metro areas in North Carolina have very high hub shares. So for example, this 79% here, this is the Raleigh-Durham area, or Raleigh-Durham-Chapel Hill area, and 79% of the people who live and work in these counties also work in these counties within this designated area. Similarly, we see 79% for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area down here, and finally 76% for the Asheville cluster. Secondly, we can see that there are a few interstate interconnected labor markets. So here, there's Danville County from Virginia to this Greensboro cluster. Here's the Virginia Beach area to the northeast area to the northeastern part of North Carolina. And finally, there's a southwestern, just a few counties from Georgia forming an interconnected market with the southwestern counties of North Carolina. And finally, through this next slide, this time lapse, we can see that the interconnected labor markets are largely consistent from 2015 to 2018. And I made it slower so that way you could very clearly tell that there's not too much change, but 1 or 2 counties disconnect here and there in the middle, and there's some change in the western half earlier on, et cetera, et cetera. So, so now what are the implications of these observations? Well, for one, the presence of interstate interconnected labor markets highlights an opportunity for collaboration between states that we're connected to. So, maybe even though it's a very small handful of counties, we might want to talk to Virginia, let's say, about, how can we work together and allocate resources to maximize economic development in the Virginia Beach area with the Outer Banks-ish area of North Carolina. Secondly, knowing that there are consistent markets through a larger period of time can give, and with a high degree of interconnectivity, no less, can give policymakers confidence to build regional economic development strategies. On the other hand, there are clearly some inconsistent markets that we saw with 1 or 2 counties attaching and detaching throughout time. So that might bear further investigation. I mean, are those counties totally disconnected from the cluster in those years? Like, or is it like on the border? Were there any developments that year that led to those counties joining a cluster or leaving a cluster? Those are things that we might want to investigate, and anybody who replicates this method might want to spend time investigating. And last but not least, there's an interesting discrepancy that I found that may have been hard to see if you're not familiar. So there's this Rock Hill Charlotte-Mecklenburg MSA, which is connection between York County and Gaston County, where it's Rock Hill, South Carolina. It's like 10, 15 minutes from the border of North Carolina. And again, the census designates an MSA between these 2 cities. But based on the loads data, we don't see an interconnected labor market forming between the 2. And that's because there's insufficient cross-commuting between those areas. So even though there's lots of people traveling from Rock Hill to Charlotte-Mecklenburg, most likely, we don't see the same reciprocal travel from Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and as a result, they don't form an interconnected cluster. So this highlights sort of like a subtle nuance and difference between MSAs and the loads data that we use to produce these markets. So with that, that's the end of my presentation materials, and I'm going to hand everything back to Jeff. Thanks for being so welcoming to me.
Thank you very much, Xi, for sharing your research and undertaking it. So now that understanding how the regions cohere with each other in terms of the census not only help us understand the nature of labor sheds, but also to see how consistent things are. The question that we have now is how may the actual nature of these commutes change over time? The inspiration for this question came from a view that we were doing using a different Census Bureau product, the American, which people are familiar with. I'm sure people are quite familiar with those. Anyways, what we decide to do is look at the during work data here and look at how the mean commuting time has changed in North Carolina over time. And what we found is that commuting times have grown over the course of, pretty much over the course of the American Community Survey, but in particular from 2010 to 2019. So at the state level, in 2010, there's the mean commute time was 23.4 minutes, and it increased to 25.7 minutes by 2019. To look further into this, you see the fruit of our labor on this particular slide. We want to see, well, what was going on underneath the surface that underlies the statewide numbers. And what we see here is out of our 100 counties, 40 of them showed statistically significantly longer commutes than from the 2010 to 2014 period to the 2015-2019 period. We use the 5-year data because with counties, not all of our counties are above 65,000 in North Carolina. So what we see on the map here are basically the zones range all across the state. Some of them are in around some of our major metropolitan statistical areas, but other ones are in a little bit more rural counties. I will note that there are 3 counties out of 100 that actually showed a significant decline in terms of the length of time. And for those of you who are curious to get this on a trivia night, there are Ashe and Avery counties in the northwest corner of our state in the mountains, and Onslow County on our Atlantic shores. So now that we have an understanding of potential labor markets through the interconnected markets, and now we know a little bit about the commuting time getting longer, I'd like to get to one of the key questions that we wanted to dive into a little bit further, which was, do workers live and work in the same county? And if so, how has this relationship changed over time? In the labor market information world, often when we work with people, we urge them to think outside the county borders and think more of in terms of a larger community or a larger regional a larger region to consider for analysis and comparison. So if you think of the economic development side of things, if a company is going to locate in a particular county, they're going to search for workers not only in that very county, but also the surrounding counties as well. Likewise, in the workforce development world, the workforce development and the community colleges or schools are going to train people not only for jobs within their county borders, but also jobs to take outside of the county borders. Let's put it another way. Among economic researchers in the data sets that we use and the way that we frame things, it's useful to make the distinction between household surveys and organization or establishment surveys. So for things like our unemployment rates or other labor force statistics, at the national level, we get this through the current population survey, and at the local levels, we get this through the local area unemployment statistics, otherwise known as LAUS. And each of these models and surveys really focus in on the concept that we're measuring people where they live, so the labor power of that particular town or county or region. On the flip side, if we're measuring jobs and employment, we're talking about talking to employers for these things. Things like the quarterly census of employment wages, the QCW, measures the employment at where the work is located. This slide that you see here is the anecdotal example from my life. So I'm a person who resides in Orange County, North Carolina. In the statistics that I contribute to, I'm a part of, one of many. My labor power is measured in Orange County, North Carolina, along with my neighbors. However, with my coworkers, my employment or job numbers are associated in Wake County, because we are broadcasting today from lovely downtown Raleigh, North Carolina, which is in Wake County. So our employment numbers are here. This is all to say, I know I'm the anecdote, but people live and work in different locations, and we have to consider these things at a regional level. We also have to consider how these things may change over time. There may be reasons why the commute times are getting longer. How would we look into exploring this? Well, let's use the loads data. So this picture here is worth tens of thousands of workers, which means even that many more words. And what it basically does is it shows the inflow-outflow analysis in the map from this. I'm not going to click on and show you how it's actually done, but this is the product of the work and one particular example. So this is Alamance County, North Carolina. It's first in alphabetical order among our 100 counties. What we see here on the left-hand side is roughly 28,000 people who live outside of Alamance County, but whose jobs are located in Alamance County, so they're likely commuting in. We've got roughly 24,500 people who both live and work in Alamance County. And we've got finally 33,000 people who live in Alamance County, but they work outside of Alamance County. This isn't necessarily related to the geography, although there are people coming in from Greensboro east into Alamance County and people traveling east out of Alamance County into Orange County for their jobs. So what we did, nuts and bolts, is this is very simple. We used Excel spreadsheet, and I wasn't able to show all 100 counties on the slide without getting the font a little bit too small. So I'm showing the first 4 counties here. But basically, it's the first 3 columns look familiar. It looks very much like what we saw in our last slide here. And then what we wanted to do is a little bit arbitrary, but we wanted to see basically whether or not a county had a majority of its workers, a majority of its resident workers live and work in their county, or is there a greater percentage of people who live in the county who are commuting outside of the county for work. So that's where we come in with these 2 columns. B plus C is the denominator, and then our final column to the right. As I said, it's arbitrary. We put it in as half as majority. These 4 counties, none of them have a majority of people who live in the county and work in the county. So one methodological point I'd like to make here, this could take a while, maybe not so much if you're coming from Delaware, maybe a lot longer if you're coming from Texas. But we can get this from on the map, and we can make all the clicks. And it works out great because on the map includes all the loads data from all of the states that are part of the agreement. But the difficulty that comes in is, one, if you want to do it for a lot of years, it's a lot of clicking. And 2, we always want to try to automate things and make things a little bit simpler for next time or in perpetuity. So we wrote a SAS program that can work and take care of the first 2 columns here, A and B, perfectly and match it perfectly to on the map. The 3rd column, the live in county but employed outside the county, with the program, we can't quite match it to on the map because we didn't necessarily download all of the other states. We come very close there, but there are some counties where people will simply live in the county but work out of state. If we have the neighboring states, which we had downloaded for the interconnected markets research, we can get closer to that number, but we don't always hit it on the head. So something to consider if you're trying to replicate this at home for your particular example. So what are the results? The results came out to be quite interesting from this. So before the Great Recession, there was roughly 44 of our 100 counties had a majority of workers live and work in those counties. But after the Great Recession, we've had roughly in the teens for the number of counties that have a majority of their workers living and working in the same county. For 2018, these 14 counties were the identical 14 counties as found in 2010, though I did bump up Macon County is 49.9%, so that bumps up to 50% there, whatever it's worth. Visually, can we tell a story visually from this? In 2005, not necessarily. These counties, the counties in the darker blue, are the counties with the majority of workers living and working in the same county. These are located all across the state, in the western part, the eastern part, in metro areas or nearby metro areas, and some in a little bit more rural circumstances. But by 2018, what we see is a story of largely metropolitan statistical areas in the larger counties, with a few small counties put in there. So for this particular map, our largest cities are Charlotte and Raleigh. Charlotte's located in Mecklenburg County, so where my arrow is, and Raleigh is located in Wake County, which is over here. A lot of these counties that show up on the map are part of MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas. So Asheville's part of Buncombe County. Hickory is measured in Catawba County. And I'll give one more example. Greenville is located in Pitt County here. There's three exceptions to this rule. The far west part of the state, Macon County, very small and self-contained. In the northwest corner of the state, Watauga County, where Boone is, the town of Boone is located. That's where Appalachian State University is. Shows up here, and finally, all the way the furthest east we've got at the Outer Banks in Dare County as the third small county. So coupled with the longer times for commuting, this shows that people have likely been increasingly commuting longer distances, or certainly outside of their county lines, over this particular time period. The next question we wanted to get into is, well, is there something about the labor markets themselves or the nature of the labor markets themselves that impact this particular question? So we decided to look into this look into the nature of commuting by looking at the size of labor markets and see if that makes a difference. Do workers from large metro areas or large labor markets commute outside their region for work? And if so, to what degree do they do this and where do they go? And then the second question is, do workers from smaller counties or labor markets stay in their labor market, or do they commute into the larger size labor markets? I think we probably know the answers, but knowing to the extent that this occurs can be really useful. So this particular map that we see here is how we broke down our labor market sizes. This map is taken from our 2018 employer needs survey. Every other year we do an establishment survey across our state to learn about the hiring needs and difficulties and training needs and other workforce development concerns across our state. In 2018, we had built on research that we'd done that can be seen in the lead feed, in fact, from a little bit earlier, that noted that as a result of the Great Recession, different communities were able to recover at different rates depending on size. So the larger communities, the big MSAs, size 1 million or so, and above, wound up regaining their total employment faster than the smaller labor markets and more robustly. So on and so on, to the point where some of the more rural areas actually hadn't recovered their employment levels even years and years after the initial downturn in 2007. So this particular map, the very lightest blue shows our large labor markets. The big ones, basically Charlotte and the Triangle area. A Triangle area consisting of both the Raleigh Metropolitan Statistical Area, these three counties here, Franklin, Wake, and Johnston, and the Durham-Chapel Hill Metropolitan Statistical Area, which consists of Person County, Orange County, where Chapel Hill is, Durham County, where Durham's located, and Chatham County. Our medium-colored blue represents all the rest of the metropolitan statistical areas across our state. And I've mentioned several of them, going from west to east. The furthest west we've got is Asheville, and if you follow I-40 all the way down, you can get to Wilmington Metropolitan Statistical Area down by in the southeast corner of our state. Our third size labor market is our micropolitan labor markets. These, some of you might be familiar with the term micropolitan, but for those who aren't, this basically refers to statistical areas whose urban center is between 10,000 and just under 50,000. So these are definitely smaller than your metropolitan statistical areas. And these are in the darkest blue, and they're located all across the state, from as far west as Jackson County to as far east as Dare County at the Outer Banks. And finally, we've got our rural labor markets, which basically are counties that aren't part of either a metropolitan or micropolitan statistical area. I believe there's 24 of those in the state of North Carolina. And they're located all over, a lot in the mountains and some in the eastern areas, which are high agriculture areas in our state. So how did we do this? I basically grouped these workers in these particular counties, by their counties in particular labor market sizes. And what we wanted to do basically is do similar analyses as we've done before in terms of whether or not a worker will work in their size labor market or will go outside their size labor market in order to, for their employment. So the results are pretty much as we would expect, I think. There's a strong relationship between labor market size where a worker lives and the labor market, the size of the region where people live, and whether or not they're employed in a similar size labor market. So in this particular case, roughly 86% of people who live in these large MSAs also work in large MSAs. 75% of people who work in the smaller metropolitan statistical areas live there also work in these. Now, I will note that a full 40% of people who live in rural counties have their employment in metropolitan statistical areas. But this relationship doesn't necessarily work in reverse. So very, very small percentages of people who live in metropolitan statistical areas, both large and medium labor markets, and even the micropolitan areas for the residents, generally have their jobs in rural areas. Now, there's probably a few of you who are scratching your head out there and said, yeah, I know why this is the case. This is probably the case because you just showed us 2 slides ago that a lot of people live and work in the same county, particularly those in these large MSAs. And I thank you very much for paying attention to earlier parts of the presentation. And I will note that it is indeed the case. So if you look at all workers across the state, just under 48% of people who are private primary workers, that's who we used for analysis. They work in the same county as they live in. This does vary by labor market size. So in the large labor markets, just over half of workers live and work in their same county. But when you get to the rural-sized labor markets, only just over a third of people live and work in the same counties, and therefore just under 2/3 of these workers actually leave their home county for their job. When we take these workers out of the equation and just only focus in on the workers who leave their counties, like myself, anecdotally, we do find that it's a very similar relationship as found before. So if you live in a large labor market, you're likely to also work in the large labor market, not 86%, but just under 71%. Likewise, with the medium labor markets, we have roughly half of workers in that situation as the same. I will directly point out that roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of people who live in outside of metropolitan statistical areas will commute into metropolitan statistical areas for their work. So taking my piece of the presentation together, we see that workers in rural and micropolitan areas are more likely to live in a different county than their residents. And they're also more likely to drive or commute to larger labor markets in order to work. But this process doesn't necessarily work in reverse. People who live in these larger these larger areas don't necessarily commute to more rural areas for work. This makes sense given the nature of the recovery that we saw over time. With job recovery in our larger metro areas improving a lot quicker. So the jobs are in that area. Not to mention that people are also moving into those areas as well in terms of the population. I'll say more about this in 2 slides. So, to tie everything together, including the interconnected markets research, I think that this all speaks to needing to understand larger economic regions than just outside the county level. We have to think of these things as regions or as labor markets or sheds rather than individual counties in these regards. Economic activity and living and commuting doesn't necessarily stop at county lines, even though people may make housing decisions based on some county demarcations. They don't necessarily always even stop at the state line. As Chi pointed out, some of the findings that we have in terms of a crossover into Denver, Virginia on our northern border, certainly the MSAs are already in place. North Carolina has 3 of our MSAs that were associated with that split across states, the Charlotte Concord and Gastonia MSA that includes those counties in South Carolina that she mentioned. The Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Newport News, one that splits across Virginia and North Carolina. And then finally, our Myrtle Beach, South Carolina and North Carolina, which includes Brunswick County, just at the bottom corner. We can also see from this research that we have to watch for metro area growth in terms of jobs and population. So the jobs have been growing and recovered quicker in these metropolitan areas over this time period. The population is also increasing in these particular areas. There's a movement in North Carolina. There's 51 of our 100 counties lost population over time. But coupled with that, with the exception of perhaps Rocky Mount Metropolitan Statistical Area, all of our metropolitan statistical areas grew over this time period in terms of the decennial census from 2010 to 2020. This shows this continuing growth in North Carolina, but this is also a national and international story of people moving into cities and or suburban areas. So future research, we'd like to continue with our to monitor interconnected markets. I think she did a nice job of talking about some of the details that we want to look into and try to consider as we do this. We also want to tie in some of the interconnected market research to some of the covariants that we can see, covariables that we can see through the loads data. Things like industry background of the workers. Is this associated with, do commuting patterns associate with people who are, how do they associate with industry? So do people who work in goods producing industries, are they more likely to cross commuting, cross county lines for this, move across different interconnected markets for their work? These are things that we want to look into. We also want to more directly map these patterns to population growth and decline. So as I mentioned before, there's a continued growth in our, towards our metropolitan statistical areas. In North Carolina, we found 2 of our 3 fastest growing counties are Johnston, number 1, and number 3 is Cabarrus County. These 2 counties are both parts of these large metropolitan statistical areas, but they're not necessarily where the largest city is located. So Johnston County is contiguous with Wake County, where Raleigh's located, and Cabarrus County, even though it has Concord, the second city in there, Cabarrus County is contiguous with Mecklenburg County, which is the location of Charlotte. So by seeing the great growth in these, we can try to understand how the commuting patterns are going to continue and whether those commutes are going to be even increasingly more difficult on our interstate highways. And finally, we're interested in, this is kind of it feels like it's out of left field, but it's really kind of part and parcel of our research interest and our considerations. We're interested in looking into working from home. What is going to be the impact for this? As I mentioned earlier, Chi and I work on employment projections, and we're always thinking about the future in different ways. But how will the change that we saw in working from home, is this going to be a long-term structural change? What are going to be the impacts on jobs and, more importantly, on commutes and communities as a result of this? I think the loads data is well positioned to answer some of these questions, although it may take a little bit of time. Although I guess we can start seeing the baseline from it before the impact of what's happened in the pandemic. So that's all that we've got in terms of our program for today. I really want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our information, some of the research projects we're looking into, and we're interested to hear what questions you have or some comments you may have on this at this time. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time and open up for questions.
And thank you. At this time on the phone lines, if there's questions, so please press star followed by the number 1. Unmute your line. Record your name clearly as prompted. Again, with questions, please press star followed by number 1. We'll be standing by for questions at this time.
Great. So while we wait for questions to queue up on the phone, I'd like to remind everyone to please be courteous and keep your questions pertaining to the presentation with one follow-up question. We've received a few questions regarding the presentation, which will be accessible on the Census Academy website in a week or 2 at census.gov/academy under the webinar tab. Also, an evaluation will be mailed to you following this webinar. We would appreciate if you took the time to fill this short survey out so that we may better serve you. So, operator, at this time, are there any calls on the line yet?
I'm showing no questions at this time from the phone lines.
Thank you, Robin. So we did receive a couple questions in the Q&A section. So one of the questions was, what's the COVID impact on data collection and reporting for cross-county commuting? Jeff, I think you're on mute.
I'm on mute. I had the most perfect answer that was said. It was so genius. I hope I can replicate it. Sorry. So what I was getting into, and thanks, Arlene, for letting me know I was on mute, is a lot of what we do relies on Census Bureau data, and part of the beauty of the Census Bureau is they do such a masterful job of collecting data nationally and for comparison across all sorts of different topics and things. But as we know from anyone who's done primary data collection as part of their research, good research and good data takes a little bit of time. So we rely on the Census Bureau for that, and the impact of COVID, while we're keeping up on some of the great work that Jason Fields and some of his colleagues are doing for some of the pulse surveys, we, in terms of this commuting, we're going to be waiting on some of the updates to loads, and potentially for the American Community Survey. Although I guess this year is going to be experimental, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you. Another question we have, and I think you answered it in your presentation on slide 26, but just in case, did you use private primary jobs for the work/live analysis due to the issues with headquartering of public jobs? I have encountered this issue, especially in Wake County, North Carolina.
The short and long answer to that is yes. I think we wanted to make sure that, I think part of it was our audience. So when we're talking to economic developers and a lot of the public, they are interested more in, generating private jobs. So that was kind of our audience for it. But we are also aware and thinking about some of the difficulties with the headquarters and locations for some of our public workers.
Another question is, what are your thoughts on use of loads versus ACS commuting flows?
Good question. So I think, gosh, they're both great for the different things that they do. I think I think they're both great. I think the thing I like about the American Community Survey for this combination is that they're really talking to all sorts of households, and they can get a lot of detailed county-to-county information. I think loads might be fairly similar in that, but it might be different in terms of the sizes and the numbers. What I love about the loads is that there's a lot of other covariates that you can pick up and work through, and it's put together with a lot more detail, particularly user-friendly. I'm working with people, trying to teach them how to fish, if you will, by using the great tool on the map, or even using going behind the scenes and getting your hands dirty with microdata with the actual loads files.
All right. Robin, are there any calls on the phone?
I'm showing no further questions on the phone line.
All right. And actually, Jeff, I show no further questions in the Q&A either. Oh, okay. Sorry. One more. Found one. Have you done any analysis of county flows or low or moderate income jobs?
No, not yet. That's kind of partly on our list in terms of some of the covariates that we're interested in. I think that that would be really vital, particularly trying to figure out, questions of inequality, but also questions of trying to get people to, think about a potential impact of commuting flows, roads, and potential public transportation as well, which is something I haven't mentioned yet as a potential implication. But that's great. A great question. We're interested. If you have experience with it, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to talk shop and get your thoughts on it.
Okay, and I'll go one more time to Robin to see if there's any calls on the phone.
I'm showing no questions from the phone lines.
Okay, well, at this time, I don't see any questions either in the Q&A or in the chat. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, and thank you to Jeff and Chi for this excellent presentation. Join us during our regular scheduled time on September 15th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, when Taylor Marr presents Job Opportunity Tool, which gives a rating from 0 to 100 that measures the number of jobs within a 30-minute car-free commute from a given address. As always, we are so grateful that you choose to spend your afternoon with us, and I want everybody to have a marvelous day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. And thank you. This does conclude today's call. You may disconnect your lines. Thank you for your participation.